I thought I knew fear. After 23 years of diving in some of the most challenging waters around the world, I believed I had experienced every emotion the ocean could throw at me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on October 15, 2023, in the depths off the Monterey Bay. That day, I learned that some encounters beneath the surface change you forever, leaving scars that no amount of time can heal. The morning started like any other diving expedition. I had been planning this particular dive for months, a solo exploration of an underwater canyon system that few divers had ever attempted to navigate. The location was approximately 60 miles off the California coast, where the continental shelf drops dramatically into an abyss that reaches depths of over 3,000 feet. I had studied the charts obsessively, memorized every current pattern, every seasonal change that could affect visibility and safety. My equipment was state-of-the-art, a custom-fitted dry suit rated for deep water temperatures, a rebreather system that would allow me to stay underwater for hours without surface intervals, and enough emergency gear to handle almost any situation. The dive boat captain, Miguel, had been working these waters for over 30 years, and even he seemed impressed by my preparation level. We departed from Monterey Harbor at 5:30 in the morning, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness with the boat's powerful engines humming steadily beneath us. The Pacific was unusually calm that day, with swells barely reaching 2 feet and visibility reports showing crystal-clear conditions extending down to at least 200 feet. As we approached the dive site, I could see the water changing from the murky green of the shallows to that deep, almost black blue that signals truly deep water. The GPS showed we were positioned directly over the canyon's edge, where the seafloor plunged from 80 feet to over 400 in a matter of yards. I had dove in similar conditions dozens of times, but there was something about this particular location that felt different, more mysterious, more untouched by human presence. The water temperature gauge showed 52 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for the thick kelp forests that I expected to encounter in the upper layers of the dive. My descent began at exactly 7:15 a.m. The first 50 feet were exactly as anticipated, thick kelp fronds swaying in the gentle current, creating an almost cathedral-like atmosphere as filtered sunlight danced through the green canopy above me. Sea otters played in the distance, their sleek forms darting between the kelp stalks with effortless grace. Harbor seals occasionally appeared at the edge of my vision, curious but maintaining their distance as I slowly made my way deeper. The water was so clear that I could see my depth gauge reading without even lifting my wrist. 80 feet, 90 feet, 100 feet. At 120 feet, I reached the edge of the canyon proper, and the seafloor simply vanished into blackness below me. This was exactly what I had come to see. The transition zone where the familiar coastal ecosystem gave way to something far more mysterious and unexplored. My powerful dive lights illuminated strange rock formations that had been carved by millions of years of deep ocean currents, creating caves and overhangs that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Schools of rockfish moved through the water like living clouds, their scales catching and reflecting my lights in brilliant flashes of silver and red. Everything was proceeding perfectly according to plan. My air consumption was excellent, my buoyancy was perfectly controlled, and I was making good time exploring the upper reaches of the canyon wall. The temperature remained constant, and my equipment was functioning flawlessly. I remember thinking that this might be one of those perfect dives that you remember for the rest of your life, the kind where everything comes together in harmony. But then, at exactly 147 feet, something changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a subtle shift in the way the water felt around me. The current, which had been gentle and predictable, seemed to pause momentarily, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. My dive computer showed that conditions remained stable, but some primitive part of my brain was sending warning signals that I couldn't quite understand. The fish, which had been abundant and active just moments before, seemed to have vanished. Not gradually, but all at once, as if they had received some signal that I couldn't detect. Even the kelp above me had stopped swaying, hanging motionless in the water despite the current that should have been moving it. I continued my descent, but now I was paying much more attention to my surroundings, scanning the water around me with increased vigilance. At 160 feet, I noticed the first shadow. It appeared at the very edge of my light beam, just a dark shape that could have been a large fish, a piece of debris, or even just a trick of the light and my imagination. But shadows don't usually pace you during a dive, and this one seemed to be maintaining the same distance from me as I moved along the canyon wall. I directed my light toward it several times, but each time I did, the shadow seemed to melt away into the darkness, only to reappear a few moments later in my peripheral vision. My training kicked in, and I went through a mental checklist of possibilities. Nitrogen narcosis was unlikely at this depth with my experience level. My equipment was functioning normally, and I felt alert and focused. But something was definitely tracking my movement through the water. I decided to test my theory by changing direction abruptly, turning away from the canyon wall and heading toward open water. Sure enough, the shadow followed, maintaining its distance but clearly adjusting its position in response to my movement. This was definitely not debris or a trick of the light. Something alive was down there with me, something large enough to cast a significant shadow, and something intelligent enough to be deliberately following me. My heart rate increased, which I could monitor through my dive computer, but I forced myself to remain calm and analytical. I had encountered large marine life before, sharks, rays, even the occasional whale, and none of them had ever posed a real threat. Most sea creatures are naturally curious about divers, and will investigate for a short time before losing interest and moving on. But this behavior felt different. There was an intentionality to it that made my skin crawl even through the thick neoprene of my dry suit. I tried to get a better look at whatever was following me, but every time I turned my lights directly toward it, it would retreat just beyond the range of illumination. It was like playing a deadly game of hide and seek in the depths of the ocean, and I was beginning to realize that I might not be the one in control of this situation. The moment of truth came at 173 feet depth. I had positioned myself against the canyon wall, using a rocky outcropping to steady myself while I tried to observe whatever was stalking me from the darkness. My lights were arranged to provide maximum illumination in all directions, and I had my underwater camera ready to document whatever I was about to encounter. The water was perfectly still around me, so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat through the regulator. Then, slowly, deliberately, it emerged from the blackness beyond my lights. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The creature was unlike anything I had ever encountered in over 2 decades of diving. It was massive, easily 20 feet in length, but its shape was wrong for any marine animal I knew. The body was elongated and serpentine, but covered in what appeared to be scales that reflected my lights with an oily, iridescent sheen. Its head was disproportionately large, almost prehistoric in appearance, with eyes that were not just large but seemed to possess an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. Those eyes reflected my lights like mirrors, but behind that reflection, I could see something that looked disturbingly like recognition, as if it knew exactly what I was and was making calculations about what to do with me. The creature's movements were fluid and precise, not the random motions of a fish or the awkward swimming of most deep-sea animals. It moved like a predator that was completely at home in its environment, circling me slowly while maintaining a distance of about 30 feet. Most terrifying of all, it never broke eye contact. Those ancient-looking eyes remained fixed on me as it moved, tracking my every motion with an intensity that made it clear I was being evaluated as potential prey. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my camera, but somehow I managed to take several photos, though I doubted they would capture the true horror of this encounter. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, we remained in this standoff. The creature continued its slow, methodical circling while I pressed myself against the rock wall, trying to make myself as small and non-threatening as possible. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to flee toward the surface, but my training held me in check. Rapid ascent from this depth would mean almost certain death from decompression sickness, and besides, I had no idea how fast this thing could move. If it decided to pursue me, I would be completely defenseless during the long, slow ascent to safety. The water around us remained eerily still, as if even the ocean itself was afraid to disturb this moment. Then, without any warning, the creature's behavior changed. Its lazy circling motion suddenly became more aggressive, tighter spirals that brought it closer with each pass. I could now see details that I wished I couldn't. Rows of teeth that looked more like industrial cutting tools than anything natural, gills that fluttered with a rhythm that seemed too slow for its massive size, and fins that moved with a precision that suggested this was an apex predator perfectly adapted to its environment. When it came within 15 feet of me, I could feel the water displacement from its movement, a pressure wave that pushed against my body and made my equipment rattle slightly. That's when I realized I had to act. Staying frozen against the wall was no longer an option if this thing decided I looked like dinner. I began a slow, controlled ascent, keeping my lights trained on the creature while carefully monitoring my depth gauge and ascent rate. The creature followed, matching my speed exactly and maintaining the same relative distance. It was clear that it had no intention of letting me leave without its permission. The ascent was the longest 25 minutes of my life. Every few feet, I would pause and check my depth gauge, my air supply, and my decompression schedule, but mainly I kept my attention focused on the creature that was pacing me toward the surface. At 150 feet, it was still there. At 120 feet, still following. As we rose through the thermocline at around 90 feet, where the water temperature jumped from 52 degrees to nearly 60 degrees, I hoped the creature might lose interest or return to its preferred depth, but it continued to follow, and now I could see that it was becoming more agitated. Its movements were less controlled, more erratic, and I began to worry that the change in water temperature was making it more aggressive rather than driving it away. At 60 feet, I had to make my mandatory decompression stop, hanging motionless in the water for several minutes while my body processed the nitrogen that had built up in my bloodstream during the deep dive. This was the most vulnerable part of the entire ascent, as I couldn't move quickly or defend myself effectively. The creature seemed to sense this vulnerability and moved closer than it had during the entire encounter, coming within 10 feet of me while I hung helpless in the water. I could see every detail of its alien features now, and what I saw convinced me that this was not any known species of marine life. The proportions were wrong, the anatomy was wrong, and the behavior was far too intelligent and purposeful for any fish or marine mammal I had ever studied. When my dive computer finally cleared me to continue to the surface, I began the final ascent with a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that I was finally getting away from this nightmare encounter, but terror that the creature was still following and might attempt something aggressive in the shallow water where I would be even more helpless. At 30 feet, something extraordinary happened. The creature stopped following and began to retreat back toward the depths. But before it disappeared entirely, it did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. It turned to face me directly, maintaining that unnerving eye contact, and then opened its mouth in what I can only describe as a deliberate display. The rows of teeth were fully visible, each one easily 6 inches long and razor sharp. But this wasn't just a threat display. It was a message. It was letting me know that it could have killed me at any point during our encounter, but chose not to. It was marking its territory and warning me not to return. Then, as slowly and deliberately as it had first appeared, it sank back into the black depths of the canyon, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the impossible memories of what I had just experienced. The final 20 feet to the surface felt like breaking free from a nightmare, and when I finally broke through into the sunlight and fresh air, I had to resist the urge to swim directly to the dive boat as fast as possible. Miguel helped me back aboard, and I could tell from his expression that something about my demeanor alarmed him. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. A 20-foot unknown creature with intelligence and deliberate behavior in waters that had been studied by marine biologists for decades? He listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. When I showed him the photos on my underwater camera, they were disappointingly unclear, just dark shapes and reflected lights that could have been almost anything. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that it had been real. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. I found myself unable to sleep, replaying every moment of the encounter over and over in my mind. I researched every known species of large marine life, consulted with marine biologists, and even spoke with cryptozoologists who study unknown animals. Nothing I found came close to matching what I had encountered in that underwater canyon. The rational part of my mind tried to convince me that I had experienced nitrogen narcosis, that my imagination had transformed a large shark or ray into something more sinister. But I had been at depths where narcosis was unlikely. My mental state had been clear throughout the dive, and no known shark or ray exhibits the kind of deliberate, intelligent behavior that I had witnessed. More disturbing still, I began to find reports from other divers who had experienced similar encounters in deep water locations around the world. Most of them were dismissed as hoaxes or the result of diving-related psychological effects, but the consistency of the descriptions was unsettling. Large, serpentine creatures with intelligent eyes and deliberate behavior, always in deep water, always exhibiting the same kind of territorial warning behavior that I had experienced. I started to wonder if we really know as little about the deep ocean as marine scientists claim, or if there are things down there that we're not meant to encounter. The deep ocean covers more than 60% of our planet's surface, but we've explored less than 5% of it. In those vast, dark depths, where the pressure is crushing and the environment is more hostile than outer space, could there be species that have remained hidden from human contact? Species that are intelligent enough to avoid our research vessels and sophisticated enough to understand that humans represent a potential threat to their territory? I haven't returned to deep water diving since that day. Every time I consider it, I remember those ancient, intelligent eyes watching me from the darkness, evaluating me, making decisions about whether I represented a threat worth eliminating. The ocean had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most at peace and most connected to the natural world. But now it feels different, vast and full of unknowns that might be better left undiscovered. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that creature is still down there in the canyon, patrolling its territory and waiting for the next curious human to venture too deep into its domain. And sometimes, I wonder if my encounter was unique, or if there are other divers out there who have seen things that they can't explain, things that have changed their relationship with the ocean forever. The sea gives up its secrets reluctantly, and perhaps some secrets are meant to remain hidden in the depths where sunlight never reaches and human eyes were never meant to see. What do you think? Would you have had the courage to continue diving after an experience like this? Have you ever encountered something in the water that you couldn't explain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and would love to hear your stories. If this tale gave you chills, make sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will challenge everything you think you know about our world. Trust me, the next story I have to share will leave you questioning what other mysteries are hiding just beneath the surface of our everyday reality.